Hi everybody and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to look at how to apply email validations. So this lesson is pretty juicy, it gets very technical, so let's get started. What we want to do in this lesson is make sure that email addresses conform to the normal and the standard email address format, which is test@example.com. We'll begin with tests involving sets of valid and invalid email addresses. To create these tests, let's jump into the Rails console so we can experiment. Where's my console? Here it is here. And let me just clear all this stuff out. Let me just exit actually out of my console. And let's clear all this stuff up. There we go. So now I don't want to go into the sandbox. I want to go into the actual console itself. So to create sets of email addresses, we're going to use the following format. %W, opening, closing square brackets. This is the technique we're going to use for making arrays of strings. So what does that mean? Well, let's take a look. So let's go %W, open square brackets, test, example, and new, close square brackets. Hit enter. There we go. We've just created an array of strings. Test, example, and new. 3 separate words. Now we want to create a new addresses variable. Addresses equals %W, open square brackets, Tony@example.com, John@test.com, and Mary@new.com. Close square brackets, hit enter. Now we have 3 email addresses. What we want to do with these, we want to iterate over them. So let's say address dot each do pipe address pipe, hit enter, puts address, enter again, end. What have I misspelled there now? So what have I missed? Well, I always say this would not be a Tony Staunton lesson without some typos. And instead of putting in addresses here, I put in address. So let's do it again. Addresses each do, hit enter, puts, address, end. There we go. We've just iterated over the elements of the addresses array using the each method. Now we'll start with some passing tests for valid email addresses to catch errors in the validation. What we are trying to do is make sure that not just invalid email addresses are rejected, but also valid email addresses are accepted, even after we impose validations. So let's get started. And where do we start? Well, we go to test/models/user_test.orb. Here we are here. It's open from the last lesson. Let's add in this new test. Now, this is a long enough test, so what I'm going to do is here, I'm going to pause this video, and when I come back, the test will be here, and you can pause the video on your end and just copy it in. See you in a moment. So here we are back, and as you can see, I've written a test here, starting at line 32, which tests email validation should accept valid email addresses. And as I look at that there now, look at that typo. There we go. So what does this test do? Well, the reason we fired up the console a few moments ago and went through the exercise of creating email addresses was to show you how it works in the console so that when you write it here in the test, you understand it. So we create a new variable, valid addresses equals, and we've used the technique %W square brackets to create an array of sample email addresses. Now these email addresses are valid email addresses. We've then iterated through each of them, and when they failed, we've inserted a second argument here which identifies the address causing the test to fail. The next thing we're going to do now is add tests for the invalidity of a variety of invalid email addresses. So what's an invalid email address? Well, an email address without the @ symbol. Instead of .com or .gov, it might be comma. It might forget all about the .com and just have example, user@example. It might have another invalid character in it. So again, I'm going to pause the video here, I'm going to write this test and then come back to you. So here we are back, and starting at line 40 we have a new test, email validation should not accept invalid email addresses. There we go. Now, you can run through the tests here yourself, but the main thing to notice is that here we have a series of invalid email addresses, or I should say an array of invalid email addresses. And this is a sample of what we do not want our application to take. Now, what happens if we run Rails tests? Let's take a look. Let me save this file. Rails test. And obviously there I should have said Rails test. There we go. We have failures, and that's what we expected. We have not yet added the application code for our two tests. So let's look at how we do that now. Let's jump back into our user.orb file. Here we go. And this has previous validations from previous lessons. And this is where we add in the validation for our email addresses, but it's not as simple as that. We're going to add it in here, and we're going to say the following, or something like the following, because this will not be the finished code. Validates email, so far so good. The format, so what will the format of the email address be? So similar to the other two lines of code here, instead of presents we're saying format colon. So format space curly brackets with / and in here we're going to have irregular expression. That is obviously not the correct code, but this is what we'll be putting in. I'm just putting it here for demonstration purposes. Now, what is irregular expression, or a regex? It is a powerful language for pattern matching in strings. So what it does is it looks for patterns within strings that are passed to it, such as test@example.com. So it will look for the pattern in that. And what does that mean for us? Well, this means that we need to construct a regular expression to match valid email addresses while not matching invalid ones. So let's get started. And again, I'm going to pause the video here because this regular expression is huge. And to type it in, I'd probably just make a mistake. So I want to do it offline just so I can double check it. So again, pause this video and I'll be back to you now in a moment. So here we are back. And as you can see, I have entered in what looks like absolute gobbledygook here, complete hieroglyphics. I've entered them in here. We're going to go through this now in a moment, but some things to point out first. Here in the left hand side, we've created what looks like a variable, but in Rails, when you use uppercase, it's a constant because this regex will never change. So we've created a constant here. Next, in the validates email, we've extended this line of code with format, colon, open curly brackets, with valid email regex. So with the constant that we defined up here. So we're making sure that any email address entered is passed through our valid email regex. Now onto our hieroglyphics here. What do they mean? Well, I've created this table. Here we are here. You can download it from the resources section and you can go through it at your own time. But briefly, here's the full expression. It starts with a / which marks the start of the regex. \A matches the start of a string. This text here, at least one word character, the plus symbol, hyphen or a dot. The @ symbol is literally the @ symbol. This piece of text here, at least one letter, a digit, a hyphen or a dot. \dot is the dot symbol. This text here symbolizes at least one letter. \z matches the end of a string. / marks the end of the regex, and this should be lowercase here, so lowercase I means case insensitive. So when you put all that together, guys, you get this string here, or this piece of text. It's not really a string, this piece of text. And that validates email addresses with what we have here in the table, or the meaning that we have here in the table. This is the explainer, essentially. So take some time to go through this. Now, regexes are notoriously difficult to understand, and believe it or not, this is a very simple one. For anyone interested, there is a full regex for matching email addresses according to the official email address standard. Just do a quick Google search and you'll find that. You could insert that into the code here. So let's save this, which I've done. Let's go to our tests and let's run Rails test models. So we have an error in one of our tests, and what is it? Well, let's just scroll up a little bit. So here we go. And as we know, if we look at line 44 here, so the test that's failing is test email validation should not accept invalid email addresses. So if we go to line 44, we've added in this comment here, or we've added in this line of code here, which should inspect and output the statement should be invalid with the email address. And yes, if we look here, test@ex-example.com should be invalid. Actually, that is probably a valid email address when you think about it with our regular expression. So let's remove that, let's save it, and let's run our test again. Because I'm sure there are company names out there with name-name.com. And there we go, sure enough, passing. Excellent, guys. That is a lot of ground covered in this lesson. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next lesson, where we're going to be looking at uniqueness validation. So making sure that no two email addresses that are the same are accepted into our database. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next lesson.